Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, really quickly, just before I begin, I'm going to be, my name is Bhavi Mehta. I'm going to be the first speaker from Washington on Gov. We'll be covering 3 advantages. That good with everyone? Okay. If everyone is ready, if I'm talking too fast or anything, feel free to say slow or clear. And then POIs we already covered. Okay, that my time begins in 3, 2, 1. We strongly affirm the resolution that the United States federal government should pass the National Energy Community Transition Act of 2022. This is a policy round because of the word should, which means that we would like to weigh this round on net benefits, which basically means the greatest good for the greatest amount of people. Whichever side can provide net benefits, the greatest good for the greatest amount of people, should be the one winning the round. The plan of the affirmative is going to be that the United States federal government will pass the National Energy Community Transition Act of 2022. The actor is going to be the United States federal government. The enforcer is going to be the USFG. The time frame is going to be ASAP, and the funding will be by normal means. Moving on to some definitions. Let's talk about what the National Energy Community Transition Act actually is. What this act does is it establishes a federally chartered, non-governmental, non-profit corporation overseen by a diverse and carefully constructed board to provide economic support to local governments and other eligible entities in transitioning communities. Let me give some background information on how exactly this bill is going to work. The corporation's board, which I said would be diverse, is going to be comprised of members from eligible communities. So representatives are going to be there with relevant economic development experience and representatives from labor organizations. And the initial makeup is going to include representation from each of the 6 priority energy community regions outlined by the Coal and Power Plant Community and Economic Revitalization Group. It'll also provide a significant down payment to a new permanent endowment and outline a framework to grow it over time. What that means is it's going to give ongoing funding, long-term funding to these communities to support their clean energy. In short, it addresses and also going to help them transition from coal and fossil fuel to clean energy. In short, it's going to address the loss of public revenue that occurs when major fossil fuel facilities such as power plants, refineries, and mines shut down. Okay, moving on to our first advantage, which is on climate change. Subpoint A is going to be rural communities and they're fossil fuel dependent. Many states right now are currently dependent on money from drilling, mining, and burning of fossil fuels to fund their annual budgets. This can slow growth and interrupt economic diversification. Some places, like say Los Angeles or bigger cities, rely on fossil fuels, right? But when they're transitioning to clean energy, they have money and the economy to fund their public revenue. The issue right now is that rural communities who rely on fossil fuels don't have the money to fund the transition from fossil fuels to clean energy. And when fossil fuel plants that they're reliant on their economy for shut down, oftentimes their economy suffers. And when their economy suffers, they don't have money to fund their public investments. When they don't have money for public investments, that leads to a lot of damage because they don't have money, say, to combat pollution. They have high levels of economic distress. They have low education rates, and this just exacerbates things like the minority wealth gap, because most of the people living here are minorities, and if they're living in bad economies, then they're earning less, and most of them are unemployed. One example that I'm going to be providing is of Colorado. When a coal-fired power plant just outside the tiny town in Colorado closed in 2019, it had the makings of a disaster. It led to economic distress. The facility provided nearly half the tax revenue to the region. Left without vital funding for its fire department and school district, the town was terrified of its future, and unemployment rate doubled overnight. The senator in Colorado introduced this bill specifically targeting this community, but he's widened it to target other communities as well. But it was an enduring way to support economic revitalization in those communities. The transition is the key part to notice here. It tackles the issues of climate change, coal transition, and moving forward in an equitable way to ensure that everyone benefits. The second subpoint is going to be global warming in general. Climate change is a defining issue of our time, and we are at a defining moment. From shifting weather patterns that threaten food production to rising sea levels that increase the risk of catastrophic flooding, the impacts of climate change are global in scope and unprecedented in scale. Global climate change is a huge issue, and we as a country need to come together to collaborate and work together to combat the huge issue that is climate change. And this Transition Act is going to help those rural communities that struggle with the choice of economy or fighting against climate change have the funding to support their economy while they fund climate change, producing the net benefits. Okay, moving on to our second advantage, which is going to be on economy. Our first point is going to be on employment. The transition to clean energy is expected to generate 10.3 million net new jobs globally by 2030. Note the word transition. This will offset the 2.7 million jobs expected to be lost in fossil fuel sectors as a result of fossil fuel facilities closing down. Most of the anticipated job gains are likely to be in electrical efficiency, power generation, and the automotive sector. The latest energy system models from Stanford University show that 145 countries, the energy transition to 100% renewables would also pay for itself within 6 years. So don't let my opponents come up and say like, oh, this is going to be a lot of money lost, because in the end, in the long term, this money will be paid back. So in the long term, we are helping economy, we are helping people get employed, which also helps people in these rural communities who are in poverty, because when people are in these impoverished communities lose access to fossil fuel facilities that support their economies, then they're going to be losing jobs, spiraling into worse poverty, and poverty can lead to death. So in the affirmative world, we prevent death in the long term. Our third advantage is going to be on equality. The biggest point to recognize here is minorities, because this bill supports those groups specifically. Air and water pollution and risk associated with climate change fall disproportionately on Black, Latinx, Indigenous, Asian, and poor communities. Another subpoint of this is going to be gas pipelines. Gas pipelines oftentimes go through Indigenous land without their consent. For example, look to like say the Standing Rock Sioux and other tribes in the United States where gas pipelines go through their specific land, and because it leads to greenhouse gas emissions in those specific areas, which also the United States federal government has made it so that those communities are reliant on it for their economies. This bill is also going to specifically target tribal communities, and those tribal communities which have gas pipelines that are hurting their public health and exacerbating climate change and making them reliant on something for their economy that they shouldn't be reliant on will change. They'll be able to move to clean energy. Fossil fuels depend on and contribute to the legacy of systemic racism in the United States. Oil, gas, and coal activity in the United States takes place on the ancestral lands of indigenous peoples, making the fossil fuel industry complicit beneficiaries of the forced removal and genocide of indigenous peoples. Racist practices such as housing discrimination, long-standing social and racial inequalities, colonization occur as a result of fossil fuels in these different communities. Now on to why the AF plan will change these things. Studies show that restoration, meaning undoing the public health harms of fossil fuel pollution, is possible. By taking advantage of this transition and natural experiments when refineries and power plants are retired, researchers have found that measurable improvements in the health of nearby communities occurs, and this leads to better health for these minorities and specifically who are already in such horrible conditions in our countries. Research also shows that phasing out fossil fuels slowly will deliver immediate public health improvements to historically targeted communities, which leads to a better quality of life for these communities overall. It prevents death. Vote for the team that supports minorities. Vote for the team that fights against climate change. Vote for the team that supports economy. Vote for the team that produces net benefits. Vote AF. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Hello, I'm Michael Land. I'm going to be the first negation speaker for this debate. We're going to start on the neg case into the app case. Neg case with the countdown at the end, and then the app case. Top down. Let me fix my flow real quick. Okay. Is everybody ready? Okay. My time begins now. We strongly negate the resolution that the USFD should pass a National Energy Community Transition Act of 2022. Starting off with our first point, which is the economy. Let's start with the uniqueness, what's going on right now. Number one, the economy was bad, but now it's recovering. Subpoint A is that the US inflation is recovering following a massive spike in June of 2022, but prices are still not great. The September CPI is lower than August, meaning that prices show a sign of stabilizing. But the B subpoint is that the Hamilton project director, Wendy Alderberg, says that core good prices, the CPI for goods minus volatile prices, were flat for the month, with categories like apparel and appliance saw declines. Basically, this means that in terms of inflation, basic necessities like clothes are seeing a decrease in inflation. But the second point is that the economy is still on the brink. Oil is volatile, and oil contributes for a large part of our inflation because that's like the main thing that people are going to be buying all the time. Any spikes are going to hurt the US greatly, and the prices are on like a very, very brink line right now. Number three is that oil is key for inflation. Specifically, oil accounts for over 25% of current inflation, and everything revolves around oil. Fourth, oil prices are increasing and domestic production is key. Oil prices have increased again in recent weeks after the Saudi-led OPEC Plus decided to scale back petroleum supplies on the market by up to 2 million barrels per day to bolster the price of oil. The only way to stop price rises is to increase oil production sourced domestically in order to make up for OPEC cuts. OPEC is like in the Middle East, this group that produces much of oil and sells it. Onto the links. So here's why the app plan is going to be bad for the economy. One, the app specifically targets oil and fossil fuel producing communities. The intention of the act is to get them to transition in hopes of averting climate disaster, but this ignores short-term economic issues. Producing less oil right now means that prices are going to shoot up. But secondarily, they destroy consumer confidence. Specifically, prices going up drives people to stop spending money because they cannot afford things. This harms the economy as less money is flowing, and this leads to a recession. But third is investor confidence. Investors get scared when the economic recovery currently going following our June spikes, they feel like it's going to stop the economic recovery, and they're going to hold back their investments. This leads to less money flowing and once again economic death. Onto impacts. Number one is going to be inflation. People stop being able to afford food again right as they were getting some relief after the last crisis. This leads to people falling back into the poverty line as their impacts, which is like sick and dehumanizing. But number two is climate, because the economy is the internal link to climate. People won't care about climate change. People won't care about renewable energy. They won't buy things like better cars if they physically cannot afford basic necessities, which means that the economy should be coming first. But thirdly, it's Republican shift. People get pissed off at the current government. Oh, I'll talk about this later. Because our second point is going to be Republican backlash. Starting off with uniqueness. One, there's a close race for the midterms right now, but Democrats are currently ahead. The A sub-point is that the race for the Senate and House is extremely close, as Democrats barely cling on to maintain a narrow majority. Most swing states are showing about a 50-50 tie for the candidates, but Democrats potentially could turn seats in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, but they are also at risk of losing Georgia and Nevada. Overall, they could swing either blue or red. 538 gives a 59% chance that Democrats will win the Senate, but higher chance that Republicans will win the House. The B sub-point is that Roe v. Wade being overturned increases Democrat voter turnout, which galvanizes voting, and the C point is that falling gas prices put some voters' economic fears at ease, which means that they're going to vote Democrat more because Biden's in power right now. Two is that Republicans are in support of oil and coal. Republicans are raising opposition to Joe Biden's agenda in 2022 have dug in around a unifying rallying theme that the fossil industry should be protected at almost any cost. In a recent letter to John Kerry, Biden's climate envoy, more than a dozen Republicans state treasurers accused the administration of pressuring banks not to lend coal to oil, and gas companies, adding that such a move would, quote, eliminate the fossil fuel industry in our country in order to appease the U.S. president's, quote, radical political preferences. In other words, they're very defensive about coal. But thirdly, midterms are key right now. Climate solvency is the biggest issue here. IPCC gives code red, and current measures are not enough to meet the temperature target that guarantees reversibility. Dems need midterms to uphold previous acts like the Inflation Reduction Act and create new laws to further invest in renewables. Onto links. So why is the plan going to make Republicans win the House and the Senate? Firstly, it's Republican rhetoric. Republicans use this as a new voting issue to galvanize voters. This is seen and spun as a direct attack on the foundational oil of the U.S. Such a big action to reduce the importance of oil leads to strong rhetoric on the Republican side. But the B sub-point is that perception matters the most. Just the wording of the bill itself as a, quote, pathway for communities to leave oil is enough to spark outrage and voting. Our second link is that we get Republican campaign strategy. This becomes a key part of their strategy in a time when Trump has broken the party up. But thirdly is the oil lobby. Oil companies are obviously going to be against this because they want to keep their profits. This means they're going to fund millions of dollars in ads and lobbying, again, furthering the Republican cause. But fourth is political capital. I'll take it at the end because I have a little time. Sub-point A is that Democrats lose political capital, meaning that even if they win the midterms, Republicans have more of an excuse to not cooperate on bipartisan issues. Onto the impact. Number one is going to be climate solvency. This basically, so we turn the app because even if the app passes their bill and even if it's good in the short term, the Republican backlash means once they get in on the voting issue, they're going to reverse the bill. This turns the entire app because it means it's a whole waste of time. But secondarily, we're going to not be able to solve for any climate change issues in the future because once Republicans get into the legislature, they're going to do a lot more bad things. Okay, onto our counterplan. Thus, our counterplan is the USFG should delay passing the National Energy Community Transition Act of 2022 until after the 2022 midterm elections. Again, we should delay until after the midterms. So competition is functional and net benefits. Obviously, we can't do the same bill twice, and if we do it twice, it's a waste of time. Solvency is that we do the app. Just a bit later, which shouldn't matter that much. Onto their case. Yeah, we agree with all their background to the definitions, things like that. Again, point out that it's ASAP, that means it'll pass right now. And the perceptive link is all that matters. Onto their first point about climate change. So the key here is that they only give uniqueness arguments, or they only give reasons why like people are dependent on fossil fuel and why that's going to be bad for the climate, but they give no links as to why they're actually going to solve for any point. Specifically, they say that like when a coal plant is closed, the towns are going to get like massive economic harms, right? But they don't prove that their plan is not going to create any new jobs in the status quo. So even if they're going to give like some money or some funding to schools or something like that, they're not going to be able to create any jobs. This means that the economies of these towns are still going to be harmed when the oil companies leave, meaning they still won't like kick these oil companies out, which means they have no link to climate. They just like provide no analysis as to how they're going to solve for any of these problems, or even analysis as to why these towns are even going to then shift away from oil. On their point about the economy, they say that fossil fuel jobs are like even though we lose some fossil fuel jobs, we're going to gain transition like renewable energy jobs, and this is going to solve for like any of the economic problems. The issue here is that the skills are not transferable over. If you have a job in the fossil fuel industry, you can't just immediately go and work in the renewable energy because these are totally different technologies, totally different systems of infrastructure and things like that, which means that it's not transferable, which means that you're still putting millions of people into unemployment. But we say that the jobs created by renewable energy are transferable. Like these same jobs happen in other industries like tech and otherwise, which means that these jobs you're creating, like it doesn't do anything. You're not going to reduce unemployment because the people that are going to get these jobs already have jobs right now. But also they say the transition itself pays for itself in 6 years. Like this makes no sense. The transition is extremely costly and like the transition is extremely costly. Look how a lot of our climate infrastructure needs to be constantly maintained and leads to heavy mining of heavy metals. This is probably going to be very expensive and like not be able to just pay off immediately. Thirdly, on equality, you can't buy any of their impacts. Like, first of all, the gas pipelines don't make native communities reliant on gas because they're not even using the gas. The pipeline just going and encroaching on their land. The plan is not going to reduce, like, take away these pipelines, meaning they can't access any of their impacts. The pipeline still exists. They're not going to solve for genocide.
Cool. Just give me 1 second to grab my timer. Okay. Before I start, a brief off-time roadmap. So my name is Divya Mohanty, and I'm the second opposition speaker in this round. And just for a brief off-time roadmap, I'm first going to be addressing the app case, and then I'm going to be addressing the next counter plan and then their case. Okay, so my time starts in 3, 2, 1. Let's start by addressing the app case in this round, which is AKA our case. So in response to our first advantage on climate change, we brought up the examples of Colorado and about how when the coal and oil industry fell out, they had completely no support afterwards, and why this bill changes it. Now, my opponents tried to bring up the fact that we have no links on why towns will shift away from this, et cetera, et cetera. This is fundamentally incorrect. In my teammate's speech, she literally explicitly explained what the bill will be doing. We are creating an enduring way to support the economic revitalization in these communities. We are putting money into creating and building a system that was going to help a healthy transition away from this without any sort of serious economic deficits in places like these rural communities that are seriously dependent on this oil and coal. This bill is a true reflection of how people across. Now, the fact is it's tackling issues of climate change, coal transition, moving forward in an equitable way. Let me just once again explain what this plan is doing. We are providing a significant down payment to a new permanent endowment fund to outline a framework that is going to grow over time. It has a reliable long-term funding source, and it is invested and managed, generating a return of over 5% annually. We are going to be distributing funding, and so this loss of public revenue does not happen. These are the links. This is how this plan will be helping these rural communities from staying still. We have provided links, and I just repeated all of them. So this, our first advantage still stands. The rest of it has not actually been refuted in any way, shape, or form. Now, let's address our economy argument. Now, they said that our point on how the clean energy, the movement to clean energy will generate 10.3 million net new jobs, and this will offset the 2.7 million jobs that are expected to be lost in fossil fuel sectors. They said, oh, the skills aren't transferable, unemployment will still happen, etc. However, the fact is this is fundamentally untrue. Most of these anticipated job gains are likely to be in places where they will need power generation which is something that transfers over fossil fuel power generation and electricity power generation. It requires the same kind of mechanical engineering. These jobs are transferable. And even if they aren't, say some people will be unemployed, sure, that might be a short-term effect, but in the long term, the job raise is so much bigger, 10.3 million net new jobs compared to 2.7 possible job losses by 2030. The numbers are just beyond staggering in favor of the affirmatives plan. In response to our statistic on the fact that in a study, these 100% renewables will pay for itself within 6 years, they say, oh, it'll probably be very expensive. Maintenance is expensive. They said it wasn't true. First off, they have no solvency, and we have solvency on how there have actually been studies conducted on the fact that this will happen. The fact is, you know what paying for itself means? Paying for itself means the money that is put into this investment is returning enough to continue paying for the maintenance throughout it. This is how it works. That's how paying for itself works. So their whole it'll probably be very expensive argument doesn't stand at all. Okay, in response to our advantage on equality, they say, oh, it's not going to solve because it doesn't get rid of these pipelines and systemic racism and genocide effects are still a thing. In response to this, this is literally what it's doing. It is stopping these oil pipelines from A, continuing to be extended, and it's B, going to stop the use of dangerous oil moving straight through indigenous land, dangerous oil that was put there without their permission. Now, the fact is, okay, sorry about that. The fact is that the concerns here is that spills can contaminate tribal drinking water supplies. It can contaminate state water supplies. The greenhouse gas emissions are there. Once we stop using these gas pipelines, the dangers of a spill will not be here. The dangers of greenhouse gas emissions will be severely reduced. So the fact is, even if we might not be, say, digging the whole pipe out of the ground and removing it, the effects of just stopping using this is going to be insanely immense. And once again, we might not be reversing any sort of genocide, but we are sincerely working on decreasing systemic racism by a bunch. As we said, these communities are disproportionately affected by climate, by pollution and by by fossil fuel emissions. So the fact is, when we say stop using these, then the effects will be seriously mitigated. And while we might not be undoing anything, we are going to be seriously compensating for what has already happened. Okay, now let's address the neg case. Let's start with their counter plan. 1 second, let me just find it on the floor real quick. Okay, so onto their counter plan. They say, in response to their counter plan, which was, by the way, just to delay it past the 2022 elections, we have a couple of responses. For one, this needs to happen right now, as these economies are facing health and economic distress right now. Judge, their counter plan is clearly flawed. The elections are in 2 years. Do we really want to wait 2 years to support these communities that are struggling? They're literally double binding themselves, because if you remember back to their case, they said something about how the IPCC is literally talking about every day how we wait to stop this climate change, we get closer and closer to it being irreversible. Yeah, so are we going to wait another 6 months to wait for it to be irreversible? The fact is that even if they do it after 2022 elections, this literally contradicts like half of their points. They talk about how, oh, Republicans aren't going to want to pass these Democrat bills. Well, they're not going to want to support bipartisan bills anyway if this gets passed after they make it. Okay, here's an analogy. If you're in need of urgent care and you need to go to the hospital immediately because you're hurt, you will go to the hospital right away, which is what the AF is saying. The neg, on the other hand, is coming and saying, oh, why do you need care right now? There are other people who might need care for you. Well, you know what? Why don't you go tomorrow instead when you could possibly be dead? The neg is letting people die. The neg is letting people lose their jobs. The neg is letting people come home to an empty living space with no food or water on their table. In fact, they're letting people in historically targeted communities, especially indigenous ones and those of minorities, suffer more for longer. Now let's address the rest of their case. Let's start by talking about their economy point. They talk about how the app specifically targets small communities and ignoring economic issues. This is wrong for so many reasons. We specifically tell you that this bill addresses the economic distress. This is turning their whole advantage to us. This bill, as my partner tells you, was created to address the fact that when fossil fuel plants shut down in different communities, the economy in those areas goes down. What this bill does is that it gives revenue and money to these communities to help them fight against economic stress by transitioning to this green energy. We are solving for the very issue our opponents are arguing. Two, we're turning their investor confidence link. We're going to be increasing investor confidence because, as my opponent said, as economies get better, investor confidence goes up. Okay, now let's continue on to their politics argument. First off, they said that Republicans are in favor of oil and coal. We need to change that mentality. Fossil fuels are bad. Okay, on to their IPCC point. Once again, their counter plan doesn't work. They're literally pushing this back up further. We're telling you more voters aren't going to be moving, more voters aren't going to be spurred to vote Republican because people want climate change to stop. Many Republican voters come from rural communities that are falling apart. These smaller communities could actually be swung Democrat because of this bill, because it's helping their economies, their money in the long term. So because of that, I know I'm out of time, but because of that, Judge, vote for the team that is doing the most as soon as possible, and an issue that needs to be addressed as soon as possible. Vote AF. Thank you.
Okay. Let me drink some water. Okay, 8 minutes on the clock. Let's see. A brief off time roadmap. I'm gonna do defense of my own case and then offense against opponent case. My time starts now. So first on the counter plan, my opponent says that like we need the things right now and that the counter plan like delays it, and that like if you're in need of urgent care, you need to go to the hospital right away. But as we literally say in our counter plan, we are delaying it until the 2022 midterm elections. When are the midterms? November 8th. When is November 8th? It's 2 weeks away. What does that mean? All of their offense is reduced because we are literally delaying this bill by 2 weeks. 2 weeks. There's not that much like massive issues that can happen in literally like 15 days. That's simply impossible. So all of their offense is dramatically reduced because don't buy like them saying, oh, there's like massive suffering. Realistically speaking, it's 2 weeks. There's not going to be that much change to their economic situation. Therefore, we need to focus on like the actual problems that can come from doing it in those 2 weeks, because there are massive issues that we get from doing it right now. On our first point about the economy, they said the bill addresses economic distress, and therefore this turns the point. But this is a misunderstanding of what like how our economy point is actually structured. We're not arguing that like we're not arguing that like the bill isn't going to like help the local economies of these places. We're arguing that because it is like motivating a transition away from fossil fuels, they are going to decrease fossil fuel production because these towns want to like improve their standing and therefore like try to do something that's not going to get like obsolete in the future, which is fossil fuels. But this ignores the fact that fossil fuels are desperately needed in the status quo. Extend all of our points about how like the consumer price index, or the CPI as my first speaker called it, basically everything is showing that things are going down right now after the peak, but oil is specifically really key for that. And therefore, and specifically as a result of like the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, cutting its production and therefore like making all the other countries have to like pay more for its oil because it's giving out less oil. That means that the US really needs oil right now to make sure the prices stay low. And if we literally are encouraging communities to like not produce as much oil, then all we're going to do is collapse the national economy. So their point, even if their point provides like money to these local communities, it doesn't matter because the oil that those communities could be producing is critically important for the national economy, not just those local ones. So this doesn't actually turn, because if anything, they're just solving for like less. They're solving locally, but we're solving nationally. So we have much broader scope. Additionally, on the links level on investor confidence, they said increase investor confidence because the economy's benefited. But again, I said, disregard this because it doesn't actually benefit the economy. It benefits local economies. Investors are caring about the national economy because it doesn't matter about what happens to an investor in Wall Street. It doesn't matter what happens in one mining town in Colorado. It matters what happens on the national stage because that's how stocks work. On Republican backlash, they say, on Republicans they extend our uniqueness about how like the midterms are super close and it's key to winning them. And they say, on Republicans like oil, they say we need to change that mentality, but this but you literally can't change the mentality. Well, right now it takes a long time to change a mentality, and literally if you try to like shove something on them and just expect them to change, that basically just means that they're going to get really pissed off, because yes, they can change, but change takes time. You can't just force it on them, and if especially with such like a key election in 2 weeks, they're literally just going to get mad. They're going to like aggravate with like short-term rage, and therefore like massively mobilize and extend literally all of our links. On on climate change, they say like the counterplan doesn't solve because uh, that like we don't actually do anything. But again, extend all of our arguments about how like Republicans winning means that there's not going to be any climate solvency because the Republicans fundamentally don't like solving for climate change. On the links level, their only response is that rural communities are going to vote Democrat because we're benefiting them because they're like shifting away from climate. But the thing is, number one, most voters aren't in these communities because like US population wise, yes, there are a lot of rural communities, but the population center, like most of the population is like in dense region or whatever. Like most of the population is closer together. Yes, there are rural voters, but a lot of the Republicans aren't rural voters, and not all of them are going to be living in mining towns. A lot of them are going to be living in places that aren't going to ever see this money, and they're going to get mad because they're so like perceptive. And even the people in the community are still going to be harmed because like oil leaving can still hurt jobs. Like yes, on their they say like they argue that like that some people can raise into skills, but again, some people still can't, and those people still lose jobs even if you like make net more jobs. So it doesn't matter because people still suffer. Also, oil propaganda is powerful. Look to like everything that big oil always does, like say that oil is clean, oil is good. Like that's literally just society. Everyone like just tried to think that oil is good, and therefore like everything, yeah, basically oil. They basically extend all of our links because they don't respond to any of them. So extend the fact that Republican rhetoric means that like all the Republicans are like galvanized into like voting against this climate or against Democrats, and because they post this climate bill, extend that it becomes part of the Republican campaign strategy that like, oh, the Democrats are like violating our core oil and fossil fuel production, therefore like killing the economy. Extend the fact the oil lobby just gets like even more aggravated because the Democrats are trying to target them, therefore they funnel money into election campaigning, and therefore the elections even won even more. And then extend political capital because the Democrats like lose their political capital because the Republicans don't even want to cooperate them because they seem hostile to Republican interests. On impacts, extend the first impact about the no climate because we turn the entire app, because once the Republicans are in power, they're literally just going to overturn the bill because they don't like climate change. And if they campaign so hard to get because of this bill that pissed them off so much, all they're going to do is basically have it overturned. We also impacted
AOI.
climate destruction. No, thank you. We also impacted climate sections because the Democrats really need to win these midterms, and then we can make really big policies in the next 2 years when they actually have the control and therefore have the authority to make these policies. When we'll control the House, Senate, and presidency, which means that we can actually pass like groundbreaking bills that can actually do climate action rather than having like a split like presidency and like a Republican House or Senate, which means that we actually it's just gridlock and we can't do anything. So basically, the implication that only the negation solve for climate change, because if the Republicans win the House or the Senate, that basically means that no climate stuff will ever get passed, and therefore climate is there's no possibility for solvency at all. On the opponent case, they say uh on climate change, they say that it's like we say that there's no links for their climate change, and they say it like creates a way to support economic revitalization that allows a healthy transition. But again, this system doesn't even necessarily solve because it doesn't actually force the oil companies to leave. Number one, yes, you're funneling money to these communities, but that doesn't actually like force the oil companies to leave. It's like, yes, you can say that the communities are going to like make the oil companies leave, but again, that number one just links back into our diss about the economy, and two, even this, the oil companies probably don't want to leave because that literally just makes them lose money. And the oil, as we said earlier, the oil lobby is incredibly powerful, which means that they don't even have climate solvency in the first place. So the app basically here, the app is in a double band. Either they kick out oil companies, which bites our politics to sad because it pisses off the Republicans, or they leave the oil companies there, which means that there's no climate solvency because there's no change in oil. So you're basically just giving money to these communities and nothing changes. On economy, there's like a dispute over transferable skills. They say that like there's still 10 million new jobs, and like most of these jobs are in gains or the power generation. And number one, this is already happening, the status quo. In the Inflation Reduction Act, there was a 10% bonus credit for projects in energy communities to like support projects that like shift away from fossil fuels. So basically, they're already doing this in the SQO, but it was moderate enough that didn't piss off the Republicans. So we're already solving for these like jobs in the status quo because we literally have a tax credit right now that's in action. And additionally, on their point about like investment money returns for maintenance, we don't actually fix the problems. They don't care about inflation too, because if we kill the economy right now, it doesn't matter if they'll pay back in like a perfect world, because if the dollar is worthless because of inflation, then we're screwed. On equality, they say it like works on decreasing systemic racism, but this is actually bad because it's hand washing. It's basically having the government say that it's like dealing with racism, but it's actually not. Therefore, there's even more systemic racism because it's hiding the problem. And then it stops pipelines. It literally just doesn't stop pipelines. Yes, they have a community like group that like advocates for things, but it doesn't actually matter if the oil lobby is so powerful. And two, if you're just giving money to them, that doesn't actually like, you don't necessarily have the authority to take away oil pipelines that already exist. Thank you, and I urge your vote for the negation.
Okay, thank you. I will be the leader of opposition rebuttal. We're gonna collapse and then look into the aff. Yeah, so just like kind of CP with neg together. It'll be a lot of overview arguments, so you can throw on our new sheet if you want to. But in general, it's gonna be neg aff weighing. Okay. Everybody ready? I wasn't ready. Okay. My time begins now. As an overview to this entire round, the negation is winning because of the delay counter plan. We are winning because we propose a better version of the plan that does not bite into the disadvantages. In order to become good policymakers and get education from debate, the neg thinks we should care about the political implications of the plan as well as the material ones. We understand the power oil companies have on politics and its importance to the Republican Party. The negation has a different advocacy from the app. They think we should do it as soon as possible, not regarding any political implications on the midterms. Whereas the neg thinks that we should do it after the midterms, after 3 weeks, not as soon as possible, but after the midterms, in order to evade all these political backlash, which has a huge impact. So this is going to be the argument that we're going to be going for, not the economy argument. We're going to be focusing specifically, our strategy here is going to be specifically focusing on the economy dissad, which goes largely conceded by the affirmative. So as an overview to this point, the general overarching claim of this point is that the Republicans are going to be outraged by the fact that Democrats are taking these actions to push oil companies out of the economy and out of these small rural towns. To give you like 4 reasons why this leads to Republicans winning midterms, right? It's going to fuel their rhetoric. It's going to allow them to have a more solid campaign strategy. The oil lobby has massive propaganda, and either way, Democrats lose political capital. Right? So the impact of this is that Democrats are going to lose the midterm election. This is critically key right now. We give you like a specific reason that like right now there are bills that need to be passed. We agree that climate change is this dire issue, and we need Democrats in power because they are the ones that actually advocate for climate solvency. Look to how like Biden passed all these bills that aren't enough yet, but are going to be enough. Specifically extend the first impact that we say like the trick, right? We turn the entire app case. If you buy our point, like which is like goes largely unrefuted, about Republicans winning the midterms, that means that once they get into power, they are going to reverse the affirmative policy. They're going to say, oh, hey, now that we have all the power, now that we own the Senate and the House, this means that we're not going to pass this means we're going to rescind the affirmative bill. We're going to just delete it from existence. This turns the entire affirmative case because if the bill is good, and we agree that the bill can be good, it's going to get deleted. But looking at their case, we actually agree with a lot of their points. They're talking about climate change. They say that climate change is important. We totally agree with this. Climate change is the biggest issue here. And we agree that these communities have to move away from oil dependence. But critically, we understand that this solvency is going to be on the longer term. We only have impacts on climate change in many, many years. Meaning, if we do it, just doing this thing like 3 weeks earlier is not going to solve for any climate change impacts. Secondly, on the economy, yeah, we also agree these people need to transition, but we also say that Democrats being in power is probably going to be more important than like 3 weeks earlier of aid. We believe that yes, we are also doing the negation plan, right? We're also doing the affirmative plan. We're also passing the same act, but we're just passing it 3 weeks later. Finally, on equality, again, we're going to solve for all of this as well because we're doing the affirmative plan. In general, yes, we agree with most of their point. We agree that this plan is going to be like is going to have some major benefits on the environment, on the economy, and on the people. We're just saying that these benefits come in the longer term, meaning it's okay to wait until we do it for like 3 weeks later in order to access all of like the political implications. So once again, here's what you're going to be weighing. You're going to be weighing the two advocacies in this round. So you're going to be weighing the affirmative plan and the negation counter plan, which is basically doing it right now and doing it 3 weeks and later. The affirmative case basically has no offense here because all of their impacts are long term. There's no difference if we do it 3 weeks earlier or now. However, on the negation, we have the biggest impact in this round, which is the fact that Republicans are going to control like the legislative branch of the United States government. This is going to not only overturn the bill, meaning we're the only ones that have this pill existing in the long term. It's also going to lead to more climate solvency in the future. And for all these reasons, I just strong vote for the negation.
Okay, before I begin my speech, just a quick off-time roadmap. I'm going to be going over aff case, neg case, and then weighing in the end. Sounds good? Okay, with that, I'll begin my time for a 5-minute speech in 3, 2, 1, and Judge, the biggest reason why my opponents lose this case is because they basically have no solvency. They double turn themselves a million times in their speeches. First, let's look at this step by step to break this down. The first negation case talks about how the economy and how by taking away fossil fuel companies, we take away the economy, we hurt the economy because there's no more fossil fuel companies or oil companies. And then they come up later and they say, oh, we're also going to pass this act just later in 2 weeks. So basically, they're also taking away fossil fuel companies in the long term. They agree that the act is a good thing because they are also passing the CP. Their only solid piece of defense or offense is this whole point on political elections, which I'll address. Either they choose not to pass the act because it hurts the economy, or they choose passing this because it's a good thing. So you should disregard their entire first contention. Now I'm moving on to address their CP, which is one of the main points of clash in this debate. Their whole CP depends on delaying it until the 2022 midterm elections and this whole thing about 3 weeks. My opponents fundamentally misunderstand the time frame. When we say ASAP, they need to understand that it takes time for a bill to be passed in Congress. We're not gonna point of order. Okay, well, we kind of brought up the hospital. Okay, actually, it's judge's discretion, but I think my opponent addressed this in our response. My partner addressed this in our responses to the CP in second speech. Okay, continuing. Okay, I'm at 1 minute exactly. Is that good? Okay, moving on. Okay, so adding on to the CP responses, multiple refutations that we said still stand. One, their CP is literally working against their disads. They talk about how the AF plan will be the AF plan will be good, and then they talk about how they talk about climate change and how the AF plan is good, but then they're talking about delaying the CP. Delaying it at any point is going to be bad because what they're doing is they're letting these people suffer in the long term. Two, in response to their politics argument, they themselves bring up how the swing state. Or actually, okay, moving on. They talk about how no climate bill will ever be passed because Republicans will be against this, and they bring up this example of the Inflation Reduction Act. This is where they make a fundamental mistake because climate change bills are still being passed in the government. This is not a new point because they brought this up in their second speech, so I can respond. Look to the Inflation Reduction Act specifically. They tell you this didn't piss off the Republicans. This is false. Republicans were mad at this bill. Most Republicans didn't support this bill, but you know what? The bill was still passed. The bill was still passed, and the climate change solvency still came true. So we tell you that even if Republicans are mad at this transition act, it's still going to get passed because you know what? In the status quo, bills like this are being passed. Climate change solvency is occurring. Bills like this in Congress are being passed. They also bring up this point about how you can't change a mentality and it takes a long time. First of all, yes, you can change mentalities. In fact, Republican mentalities are being changed as of now. Again, extend this Inflation Reduction Act example that they themselves bring and turn it on them because it's changing Republican voters' minds in Congress. It pissed off a lot of them, but most of them will realize that this is going to be a good thing for climate change in the long term. In addition, they also bring up this example of how oil propaganda is strong and these companies are going to lobby. Judge, they bring up ancient examples. They're bringing up examples of from the 1970s where companies told the country that oil is a good thing, but now we do know that oil is a bad thing. They themselves bring up the statistics of how the IPCC tells us climate change is irreversible. We know that climate change is irreversible. We know that that oil companies and fossil fuel companies are bad things, and that is why we are passing these bills in Congress, which is why this act is necessary to be passed right now. Okay, the second reason, their whole contention basically clashes on themselves. Their first contention shouldn't stand because it goes against their own CP, and their second contention doesn't stand either because they're saying that climate change bills are never going to get passed in the future because of this political clash and conflict. But we tell you that it will because of this Inflation Reduction Act thing. As of now, in the status quo, climate change bills are still being passed despite this clash, despite the fact that Republicans don't like climate change bills. Climate change bills will still be passed. Therefore, we should win on climate change. We win on the solvency of climate change because my opponents basically say that the affirmation plan is all good, right? They concede all of our points. They say that everything we are doing is good, which is why we should win on climate change because this remains mostly unresponded to. Now let's talk a little bit about their small responses to our case. They talk about how we don't force oil companies to leave. And then they talk about something like about investor confidence and how investors look at national economies, not local economies. Well, Judge, we tell you that local economies actually shape national economies. The United States national economy is shaped by employment in these smaller sectors. In addition, they also say like, and they also talk about like not forcing oil companies to leave. No, that's not how it works. We might not force oil companies to leave, but we're cutting them off from any funding, which will obviously not make them to stay, make them want to stay. They say like they're having the government say they're dealing with racism is just not covering up, it's perpetuating racism or something like that. So my opponents acknowledge systemic racism. Governments will acknowledge systemic racism. They aren't covering it up. They're literally making this plan to handle inequality and improve the lives of minorities, which is why we win on improving quality of life. My opponents conceded the winning mechanism that we're going to be producing the greatest good for the greatest amount of people. We win on econ because we help employ people in these different communities and we help prevent economic distress. We provide the funding that they need after they're in economic distress from the lack of fossil fuel companies and oil companies in their specific areas. We win on climate change because we're going to be helping reverse the effects of climate change by supporting clean and green energy infrastructure. And we support minorities and improve their quality of life and employ these minorities, prevent them from spiraling into poverty, and prevent them from dying. Vote for the team that produces the greatest good for the greatest amount of people overall. Vote AF. Thank you.
Cool. Good work, everyone. I guess the judges, we can all, independently put our ballot in and then disclose after we're all set. Just give us a couple minutes.
Good debate.
Good debate, y'all.
Good round.
Okay, I think all the ballots are in. Good work, the judges. We're the first three to submit. So I can announce a decision if that's all right. And then we can all go through a quick RFDs. So congratulations to both sides, real accomplishment. It was a 2-1 decision for the government. I can start. I voted up. And so I voted up, but I was a little frustrated about it. Ultimately, for me, it comes down to the plan versus the counter plan. As the PMR, I think does a very good job of showing the double turn, right? I'm not going to care about the econ arguments. I think op does a good enough job of showing why the delay of like 2 weeks doesn't actually matter and increases the likelihood of Republican takeover and bad climate legislation. I don't like these arguments. I think it raises a lot of competition and a lot of clash, but I don't dislike them enough to intervene. I don't dislike almost any argument enough to intervene. I think Gov could have dealt with this either using the argument that came out, I think, new in PMR that ASAP is post-election, which I just think is true. ASAP would be post-election, but I don't think I heard it until PMR. Or I think we could deal with theory arguments, but this kind of argument, the delay of 2 weeks is bad for debate. I didn't really hear either. I think the remaining potential path to victory for Gov is on persuasion, like moving rural voters to Democrats. But the balance of the warrants, I think, supports Op's notion that the only lobby and Republicans are sufficiently powerful to meaningfully increase the likelihood of GOP winning in 2 weeks. So I voted up, didn't love the strategy so much, especially since it's so risky. Like, I don't think the counterplan works at all if they don't say like ASAP in the framework. And I think the round would like basically be over if I heard earlier that ASAP is post-election. But just due to timing, I didn't hear his arguments, so I reluctantly signed the ballot for not. But that is how I got to my decision, and I'll refer to the other judges.
Okay, I can go next. I voted for go. To me, there were no strong arguments from both sides. The net was completely hanging. So I did not get the direct connection that the Republicans could be winning, and there are votes. Midterm elections coming up in 2 weeks. So after 2 weeks past this notion, completely agreeing to what Gov is saying, and just the election is the thing that you're hanging on to. So I didn't hear any strong arguments for your plan. And on the Gov side also, at least there was some plan saying that you will immediately start, and immediately does not mean today. It means it takes time for certain things to happen. And at least the plan is to, there's an argument about how the communities will be helped. If you stop funding these large organizations, the community who are suffering right now will stop suffering, and all those things. Again, no strong comments from either team. Neg loses for me just because you were hanging on to election as your key thing, whereas Gov provided at least some points. So I voted for Gov. Again, no strong competition there, but just that Gov said ASAP could mean 2 weeks, it could mean today, it could mean tomorrow, but they're not saying let's wait for election and then put some plan together. They're getting on to the point right now. So that's for me, Gov.
Okay, so I voted for Gao. The primary reason is overall the points what was presented. I feel it was more convincing, and I would probably like I had the same similar thought of Kalpana, the other judge, where like more of a political which was brought in more than the impact for me as a thing, like when a neutral argument. What is on the case? Why do we need whether vote or not? Delaying and all those things would be a secondary for me at this time. So overall, it's a great debate, a lot of good points of exchange, but I primarily sided based on the overall points, what was presented and what was confronted on that one. Anyway, good job, guys. It's a good debate. It's a lot of learnings for everybody, including us. So it's a good one.
Good work, everyone. It's a real accomplishment.
Good job, everyone.
Good luck.
Good debate.
Go represent us.
Good luck.
Good luck.
Bye.
Thank you. Good round.